met PJ, who's joining us also today here from the Foundry at Unilever. And we ended up in this sort of ignited conversation with a lot of energy around how does change happen and how do we get corporates and social entrepreneurs to collaborate more together. And I thought, gosh, this is a great conversation. Let's continue it in front of a bunch of people in our Makers Festival so we can actually just share it with others. And both to inspire, I think, our network that has a lot of questions about how do we work, sometimes with large corporations, how do we work with intrapreneurs, but also, to inspire ourselves and to see what's possible, particularly since we're, exploring some work, with these organizations and people. So yes, double our impact. I think I'll just warm up, a little bit and say, invite you each to introduce yourselves, your role in your organizations, and maybe what draws you to this conversation. Maybe we'll start with PJ.
Wonderful. Well, wonderful to be here. I was just meeting someone actually here. I'm in Copenhagen. I'm normally based in Rotterdam, but I'm at an Innovation Roundtable Summit in Copenhagen at the moment. We're just meeting someone named Luca, who was originally part of Impact Hubs, and it's just really quite interesting to see the extent to which this network just, everywhere you go, you can meet someone who's been a part of it. So quite interesting that. So I'd love to start with my purpose, which is to choreograph connection, collaboration, and compassion for each other and Mother Nature. It's really where I start with both everything that I've done in the past outside of my job at Unilever and also the job that I currently hold at Unilever and have for the last 10 years. I'm currently on a team called the Foundry, but actually for the first 6 months of this year, I was on a team called Transform, which Jen will surely dive a bit into later. And that's how I met Jen. So it's quite nice to be on a call together and on this panel. And the team that I'm on now, called the Foundry, is really about facilitating collaborations with startups that are in alignment to Unilever's biggest innovation priorities. And those innovation priorities, in many cases, overlap highly with the world's biggest priorities as well, which are things like finding alternatives to single-use plastics and the processing of it, as well as enabling regenerative farming in order to have a more resilient future supply chain to feed the world. There are also other kind of more tech-related type innovation spaces, but I think there's a nice sweet spot between what one might call that social impact space. And yeah, so keen to have the conversation today. But for me, it really, when we talk about motivations and what got me here, it started for me actually with an organization called Enactus, which is a university program. So 10 years ago when I was in university, I was a part of Enactus, and they introduced me really to social enterprise and what that was. And the idea that having a head for business and a heart for the world were not mutually exclusive, and that you could really have these business models that could help to actually unlock these self-sustaining solutions to global issues. And so to this day, I still really believe that. And I chose to work at Unilever because I felt it was a kind of had the ability to do kind of small things and have a big difference. But I've also worked on lots of kind of smaller initiatives and programs and workshops to enable early stage innovators to thrive and to accelerate what they do. So yeah, I'll hand it over to Jen.
Can you hear me? Big winner. Okay. Apologies in advance, everyone. I am mobile for this amazing meeting. My name is Jen Beeson. I work for SAP. We are the world's largest enterprise application software provider in the world. So think we run back-end connections to most things that happen in business: financials, HR, customer relationship management, supply chain. And our purpose is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. And that might sound really grand, but in fact, my job at SAP as the Director of Social Entrepreneurship is really that. It's figuring out how do we invest in incredible social entrepreneurs around the world to scale their impact: economic equity, social responsibility, environmental sustainability. How do we create incredible connections between the private sector, the public sector, and the social sector to scale solutions? I am so delighted to talk to you today a little bit about some of the projects we're investing in, but I'm also delighted to learn from you. I think that's what the really cool thing that PJ and I have the chance to do is engage with people all over the world that do things differently than us. And that's what this is all about. It's figuring out how do we come together to co-create a better world. So I'm so pumped to be here with you. I am dialing, I don't know if I said that, I'm from Denver, Colorado in the United States. SAP is headquartered in Germany, but our team is all over the world. And so great to see you. Okay, Tatiana, back to you.
Yeah, I know this is great. I think I have a few, kind of questions because I mean, this is an ongoing conversation. I think every time Jen and I have spoken on the phone, we're like, oh, it's to be continued. When's the next time? But then, I mean, I really love if anybody in the audience has questions, right? Particularly around entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, collaborating with corporates. I mean, these two amazing professional women have, a lot of thoughts about that because they've actually immersed themselves in our field, right? So they're able to make those bridges. And I think this is the time to kind of tackle some of those questions we sometimes have, or some, biases we sometimes have on how to build those bridges. But I'd love to understand a little bit more also from you personally, your stories about what inspired you to get into like social change work and really work with social entrepreneurs, because it's not just your job, you've actually carved that into your job, right? And you live and breathe that, I know, outside of your jobs as well. Why?
For me, it's really what Jen just said. It's that feeling, it's that ability that if we work together, I think we can have a bigger impact. And it's I think also a bit of what I touched on in my response to kind of why I got started in this whole space in the beginning around Enactus, and like really learning about this idea that to solve some of our biggest world challenges, actually there's like business models that can help to overcome that in a really sustainable way. And so it's really that sustainability element to it, not just like environmental sustainability, but the fact that these amazing solutions can live on, and not just be, short term or really local, that they can be scalable. That I really feel that many of our companies are trying to solve the same challenges that many entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs are trying to solve. And if we work together, we can really do it. And it is going to require that systems change, Tatiana, that you talked about early on. But yeah. Oh, Jen, sorry, you unmuted as well, so go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. It's mostly because I'm terrified if I press the wrong button, I'm going to eject myself from this conference call. So I'm trying to stay in it. When I first joined SAP, I've been with SAP nearly 17 years. I joined SAP as a fallback position. I was like, well, I guess if I can't make it working in the music business, and by music business, I'm talking private events at like a music venue. I have no real talent. I just love music. I took this as a fallback position, and I said, okay, well, I'll take this job I was living in downtown Chicago, Illinois, in the United States at the time. And I overheard this woman having a conversation, and she was talking about getting employees engaged in the communities where we operate. She was talking about investing in organizations that are doing business differently. And I was like, how do I get that job? That's the job I want. I don't want to be a marketing manager. I want to figure out how I change the way business works. And she said to me, turns out she was the head of corporate social responsibility at the time. I didn't know her. And she said, if you want this job, you need to go figure out how our business works. And once you figure out how our business works, you can figure out how to integrate change into the way it works. And if we can change the way SAP works, we have the power to change the way most businesses in the world work for good. We can change supply chains to eradicate poverty or slave labor or human rights violations. And we can figure out how to connect single-use plastics providers to second-use plastics providers to waste pickers to different parts of the supply chain to change and connect the way that materials are processed and reused. We have the power to change the world. And that's what I wanted to do. And I worked tirelessly until I was recruited into corporate affairs. And now I lead the job that I always wanted to have. And I think for me, Tatiana, and PJ, I see this too with you and our peers at Unilever. I think sometimes if you're not in this space, you might think that business is intrinsically bad. But what I have experienced is that business has the power to be intrinsically good, but we need help. We have the ability to scale. We have the ability. We have investment, but we need additional innovation from outside the way that we think. And I think that's what continues to inspire me, is when I meet leaders that are just continuing to do things differently. And I'm like, holy smokes, if we can partner together, we can scale this impact. So I'm gonna pause there. I'm super pumped to be here with all of you.
I get that. It's very early your time. So thanks for that. But I want to drop it down a notch, right? Because yes, you
Okay.
know, I think we all have these days that like we're all excited about our work, but it's really difficult work. Right. And I mean, when you're sitting in our seats, there's, you know, there's some cynicism about corporates. There's some challenges. There's timelines that are different. There's resource power dynamics. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on. And so I had wanted to touch on like, what does it mean to be an intrapreneur? But I'd love you to touch a bit more on like, what does it mean to be like building a bridge around like such different paradigms sometimes? You know, when you're working on change, you say it's all together. It's true. We have shared purpose, but the organizational sort of modus operandis of being in a large corporate, like you guys are in two of the largest corporates, right? You know, but being also a small entrepreneur. What are some of the things that you've kind of learned in terms of like how to make change happen across that?
PJ, maybe I'll kick it off and then hand it back to you. I think the number one thing is, if you want to create change, whether it's in your organization or across sectors, is you have to figure out how to create mutually beneficial goals and then execute on that strategy. People will buy in to support the work that you're doing if you're also helping them to achieve their goals. So I'll give you an example. One of my jobs at SAP is to figure out how we integrate incredible social entrepreneurs into our supply chain, not only at SAP, but also into our customers' supply chains. So SAP runs the business network. We transact $4.9 trillion worth of goods and services around the world on any given year. Imagine if we could help shift just a percentage of that to organizations that prioritize people and planet. Well, that's all fine. And you can go and talk to the procurement team, and the procurement team is going to agree with you and say, yes, this is a good idea. And yes, we know we need to rid and improve carbon emissions in our supply chain. And yes, we need to remove single-use plastics. But when it comes down to it, changing vendors is hard. And you got to get on their page. So what is the procurement team KPI'd on? They're KPI'd on cost. They're KPI'd on innovation and bringing in quality goods and services. So I can't go to them with just a pure people and planet first approach. I need to go to them and help meet them where they are to help them achieve their goals. And I think that is where I see change. It's when you recognize what is someone else trying to achieve and how can you achieve it together so that both of your goals are realized. And hopefully then it realizes goals for the planet too. So that is a big win, a win-win-win, the triple impact. PJ, I'll hand it over to you.
I agree fully. I think that's 100% the key, is there has to be that alignment. And we can speak a bit later about some of the challenges or blockers I've seen, you know, to this kind of collaboration between startups and corporates. But I think just one other insight I'd add to Jen's, and it is really linked to what she said as well. It's the personal or the human side of it. It's taking it down to the level where, you know, Jen from SAP is working with a specific social entrepreneur working, you know, in India, like just being able to connect at the human level. Even I think the past team I was on that Jen's a part of with Transform, I was so inspired by so many examples where it's just like it's just this human person that's working at Unilever, working with this human person, you know, living in Africa and starting their own business and sharing like genuine insights about like, you know, what's worked for us, what's worked for you, what are your challenges, and just being able to get underneath and to build partnership at that level and to prove it out and then to like go from there. And that's where I've seen a lot of success happen, as well as when you take out that kind of, you're this startup and we're this big corporate. Well, yeah, at the end, there's also just humans working and wanting to build that connection. So I think taking it from that level and then discussing the win-win-win from there and really understanding what it is that everyone has to gain.
You mentioned Transform, and I know you two have collaborated on that. But is there? Do you want to share? It doesn't have to be that one, but do you have any examples that you want to share of how you've made change and built some of these bridges?
Jen, I'm going to lean on you for this one.
Maybe share
Okay,
some of the
so for
challenges
those of
that you
you,
run into also.
yeah. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what Transform is a collective that came together originally between, all right, PJ, keep me honest because this is your pitch versus my pitch, but we're going to do this. There was a collective that came together with the UK's FCDO, so their Foreign Aid Development Office, Unilever, EY, and then and they formed Transform. And out of that, essentially, they are investing in social entrepreneurs, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, now extending to Latin America. There are a few other geographies that pop in there, but they're investing in leaders that are changing the world. And they're figuring out how might we integrate them into our supply chain? How might we figure out how this can change the way our businesses run? Well, what we realized in connecting those organizations is that's great, but we can't scale. But we can scale if we leverage digital technologies. So can we figure out how to connect experienced professionals anywhere in the world with incredible innovators everywhere in the world? And we're doing that today through the Transform Support Hub. So if you have, for example, organizations in your ecosystem that are looking for pro bono consulting support, mentorship support, access to corporate supply chains, they can sign up on Transform Support Hub. And then together, we look to create mutually beneficial matches, essentially. What we figured out in some of the challenges in this is, you know, we fundamentally work differently, I think, across sectors, right? So it's also trying to bring together different types of cultures, not cultures from a geography standpoint, but really like working cultures, right? Entrepreneurs tend to be much scrappier in terms of the resources that they have. And so it's really different to come together with, let's say, a corporate who's used to running a big team and having access to a lot of resources. I'll give you a use case that was really successful. We work together with a small organization out of the United States called Blue Dot. They essentially seek to integrate social entrepreneurs into branding and merchandise within marketing and communications at different corporations. They are trying to rid the swag market of single-use plastics and of things being thrown away. We came together for a pro bono consulting engagement, working with them, and they are now a vendor and a supplier of SAPs, working to change the way we work in our marketing department. And those things happen all the time. And that's the really cool thing about this is we are connecting employees and giving them a hands-on experience with organizations that can change everything about the way they work. PJ, what would you add to that? What did I miss? Or Tatiana, I mean, you guys are going through one right now even.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to add one more example as well, just to add more color to that is, you know, to really talk about that access to supply chains and whatnot. So I think there were kind of two that were always really inspiring for me when I was working on Transform. And one was Kadami Mart, which was a project where they were an organization in Ethiopia that was providing income generating opportunities for women living in rural Ethiopia to become women entrepreneurs and to start selling products door to door. And Unilever was able to partner with that organization and actually extend our own distribution channels to places where we wouldn't have otherwise had access to. So there's this element of Transform where we're helping Kadami Mart to grow through the actual business model acceleration piece and the grant funding that we provided to help them scale. But then there's the actual like organic partnerships that have emerged along the way to really link into that two-way value that Jen was talking about. And so Kadami Mart, the organization benefits, and so does Unilever. Another great example was working with a few organizations in Africa around recycled plastic and integrating some of those recycled plastic materials into our physical bottles, like with our brand Sunsilk. So, you know, those were some examples that lived in kind of like the Transform side of things as well. And I think it's some of these examples that motivated why Transform Support Hub was created, so we could do even more of this, and we could scale that impact. We could connect more entrepreneurs with intrapreneurs or, you know, expert professionals working in larger organizations that had different experiences. So yeah, I think all of that. But just to touch on one of the challenges, I think, is that indeed it's that alignment. It is that win-win that can often be difficult. And I think making sure that the organizations that we're working with to some extent have some overlap with what our priorities are as an organization, being Unilever in this case, but same goes for SAP, and finding that balance so that we're not just supporting social entrepreneurs from more of a philanthropic way, but actually in a way that there's real business value, two-way business value, because in the end, of course, the social entrepreneur also wants to create more impact and scale up what they're doing. So how do you find that right strategic alignment? And sometimes when it's not there, I find that these kind of initiatives like Transform can just sort of sit on the sidelines or be a bit like an island within the organization. And
Yeah,
I had a few people within my time on Transform that made a comment like, oh, that's really nice what you're doing, but not really recognizing that it was creating real value. So I think that just one example of a challenge that I've run into.
It's interesting. And I think I'll take a minute and open up to give you guys a breath to hear from some of our network. When you've worked with corporates and such, have you seen, like, what are some of the challenges you've encountered? Because I think it's nice to hear that perspective as well. And how did you overcome them? Anybody here being in a partnership they'd like to share a little bit about?
Well, actually, I have a question around that, exactly that, because we recently experienced, we just talked about this, that at least in Basel and in our ecosystem, we realized that in the past month, or maybe let's say year, the corporates tend to be less and less interested in the startups. So we have the feeling like it was a hype and everyone was very excited about entrepreneurs, especially social entrepreneurs. And suddenly now the hype is shifting and there's less money for it. Teams are getting like reduced. And this is a little bit what we are experiencing. And so what you now told us about, like, sometimes what's the added value to the core business? This is what we heard very often, and where we don't really have the answer always. So I'm just wondering, how can we show these success stories to also like make sure they still believe in these cases? Because for us, it's clear there's an added value, but we are not the corporates to decide on that, right?
Good question. How do we move beyond hype, right?
Yes, exactly.
To hear, like Jen and PJ, as you navigate this with your peers, right? You're obviously enthusiastic, right, and enjoy interacting with our sector. But I'm really curious about what's the conversation, with other peers, and is this hype or is this something that you think will continue?
This is not hype. I mean, I'm hyped, and this is hype, but it's not just hype. I think, Marina, the really important thing to understand is there's different ways for creating collaboration. And I think sometimes not all employees inside an organization might see the breadth of partnership potential. They might just see it as, oh, this organization is seeking financial support from me, but it's a one-way street. And I think what PJ touched on too is it's about creating dual value or triple value, right? It's about creating value for you as the organization, value for the corporation, and value for the world, right, that you're operating in. And I think establishing that as going in and saying, listen, here's how working with us is going to help you achieve your sustainability goals. This is how it's going to help you achieve your corporate social responsibility goals or diversity and inclusion goals. You're automatically going in saying, I understand your business and I understand what you're trying to achieve as part of that business. A lot of them will have stated goals around diversification in their supply chain. They'll have goals around employee engagement. They want to engage and grow their employees. Can you create opportunities to connect your organization with employees that helps them grow and be awesome leaders? And then sometimes they might have financial opportunities to offer, whether that is through recoverable grants, maybe it's just through a grant, maybe it's also through taking an ownership stake. Perhaps they have an equity program as well at their company. I think looking at all the financial and non-financial support opportunities is the best place to start. And I think sometimes it starts with asking the questions. What are you trying to achieve? And then you guys can come together on that. PJ, Tatiana, what would you add?
Well, I think it's quite interesting. So firstly, I also agree it's not a hype in the sense that I mentioned I'm at this Innovation Roundtable Summit in Copenhagen at the moment, and there's a whole track that's about startup corporate collaboration, and there's tons of corporate professionals here who are really hyped and excited to work with startups and really believe that it is the way to go beyond just kind of from closed innovation to open innovation, of course, and to be much more collaborative. And so if, you know, and so it's not in my perception that it's shrinking. I think if anything, it's maybe that it's getting more of a balance between like where it can actually happen and where the right cultures exist to support it in or like to happen, because I do think that not every company is set up to truly create these kind of collaborations. So one thing I would say is like to try to go where the energy is, in a way that if you're running into corporates where you really feel like there's a wall and they're saying it's less important, then don't I don't know how much more energy you should spend there, because in the end, even if maybe you get through one or two people, if that's the general culture, like then you're just going to keep hitting that roadblock. So trying to identify where there are those corporates who are really leading the way in this sort of corporate collaboration, and to build so that you can build some of those success stories and those use cases. But I think the last challenge, which I think as a social entrepreneur, I'd want you to be equipped to address or to handle, or at least to have an answer to. We've talked about priority and priority alignment. We've talked about cultural alignment and kind of the difference between startups and corporates. But one of the biggest ones as well is scalability. So corporates, like when we find a solution and we run through a pilot, at the end of that pilot, if it's successful, you want to be able to scale. But if you actually don't have faith that that organization has like the capacity or the capabilities to do that, then you're going to feel probably a little bit more restricted in the beginning to even want to do that pilot in the first place. So really understanding what your long-term vision, your ambition is, how you're going to get to that level if something is successful at like the pilot phase, I think is important as another thing to address along the way. And yeah, I think that's what I'd add.
I think these are really great points. And yeah, I'll throw in something from my experience, because I worked in corporate and then I kind of threw corporate away because I didn't believe it was moving fast enough and had lots of resources and wasn't really willing to change. And I found all this energy and organizations wanted to change, but people would kind of do it on the side, the sort of CSR movement as it was coming to life. And so I thought, gosh, I get to work with scrappy entrepreneurs who have no budgets, but have lots of conviction and idealism. And somehow, that made me a hub entrepreneur. And now I feel it's come full circle, because when I look at the systemic challenges and I look at the way, the role of supply chains and value chains and where people are employed and, the power dynamics, also, the all these kinds of things that are happening, right, between the sectors, it's like you can't ignore corporates, and you have a lot more good people coming into corporates asking themselves the same questions. So for me, like that bridge between the entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs is actually part of the secret sauce, because that's where you get the shared purpose and you get the energy, and you work, you can have an honest conversation. What resources do you have and which ones do you not have? And I think as Impact Hub makers, we have to have a lot more confidence and not put corporates on a pedestal like they've got it all and we're trying to figure it all out. It's like, educate yourself, talk to people who are empowered within these corporates, talk to decision makers, people who can make decisions, because they often have the confidence to, make something happen. If you're only talking to kind of the interested young professionals who come to our events, then you don't get much further, than that insight, and they're disempowered often in many of their organizations, unless they have leadership programs like yours have. So that was my learning. And I did my thesis a long time ago on change agents in corporates, because I was a frustrated change agent and I interviewed across 40 organizations. So this was some time ago, but I'm realizing how relevant it is. And that most of these change agents within corporates, what they had to learn was how to build community outside and inside. So you had to find allies. Because when you're the lone change agent, and we know this with lone entrepreneurs, that you can't really do it on your own. And that's why we build communities. And I think the next step is how do we build communities, or like we talk about, ecosystems that cross some of these organizational boundaries and find our allies. So I think that's not easy. We will make mistakes. You have to trust exactly where the energy goes. And I think the other piece that I think is related to resourcing and relevance and beyond the hype is we need to learn also as a network to mature beyond social entrepreneurs are great and we have a bunch of startups, to what are the issues that we're changing, right? So are we working in collaboration on food systems change? Are we working on collaboration for the digital economy? Are we working on social procurement? Are we working on, supply chain? Like there's so many issues. And maybe it's looking at your environment and going, what issues can you drive? Because then we need to learn more about the issues, right? To have that conversation beyond, the CSR department, right? That gets us with actual people in the business who are looking to create value. And maybe that relates back to their KPIs and how their KPIs can align year on year better to the shared purpose. So I'd say that's part of my learning in all of this.
One thing you just sparked for me is it's interesting, and maybe Jen's seen more of this, but I very rarely see startups say we're working with this other startup, and like coming together to do this thing and create this even bigger and more impactful solution. And I feel like that's an element of it too. It is this feeling like, how can we demonstrate how we are truly all in this together, and that there is like partnership in every way, shape, and form, and not just look to corporates, but also look to each other. And then by doing that, then you can answer that question if a corporate asks, like, okay, how are you going to scale? Well, maybe you're complementing each other some way and working across the board to have that. So also just, I think that activeness in really identifying where you can work together across like the startup space is, I think, important. It just kind of sparked when you were speaking, Tatiana. And I think also what's interesting is when we were at that summit in Geneva that we all met, one of the topics that we covered was indeed that feeling of like, there shouldn't be this kind of like corporates are up here or something and startups are here, and then like you're trying to come to the corporate for like to be like it really has to be this element of partnership and being able to demonstrate the real value that you're bringing to that corporate, and not like in a way that you're selling to them, but actually like they need you, and that it's a real partnership. I think that power dynamic really needs to shift.
Yeah, may I ask a question here? Sorry for interrupting, because I mean, what you are all saying is super interesting. We have been working with, in the interaction between the corporates and the startups, and how to bring the right startups and scale-ups to answer the challenges of the corporates around the world. Right? We have different examples in our network, but what I have seen is most of the time they both speak different languages. I mean, even literally, metaphorically, more metaphorically, obviously. So we are all talking here about, Jen mentioned something about social procurement. That's actually a very cool idea of how we can do it. We are already talking about building sustainable supply chains. But rather than building sustainable supply chains, why don't we start thinking on building ecosystems of support where corporates take a key role on this, because we are all in the boat, right? And the same responsibility from the corporates are in the corporates have the same responsibility than the startups out there, regardless of the size. We're all in the same planet, and we all facing the same challenges. It's just a matter of different scales. SAP and Unilever both together will have something around 300,000 employees, if I'm not mistaken, together. So you can imagine the amount of things that it's possible that you could help these organizations do. We're talking about the scalability. Yes, corporates should be doing some far more on supporting scalability, but without being coercive in the long term of really doing things that will benefit the core business of the corporates, but will also help scale sustainably the startups. Yeah. So the question is more about how can we build ecosystems of support, not only sustainable value chains, which are important, not only a program of social procurement, but really an ecosystem where corporates will play a role that will definitely change in the long term and in the short term, because we have planetary challenges right now with ecosystems that are very, in the short term. I don't know if I was clear with the question and the challenge here.
Well, maybe one area that I'll offer that we are investing heavily in ecosystems of support, and it is related to social procurement, but again, that's, our business is we create networks, right? That's what we know how to do. That's what we're investing in. We have invested in social enterprise world forums, people and planet first verification. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, and I think Tatiana is looking at this also from a global impact hub perspective, But essentially what we're looking at is, how do we verify that organizations around the world are what they say that they are? And if we can offer a very price-conscious verification that organizations are people and planet first, then corporates in turn have a level of security, I guess, of validation, saying, okay, when I enter into a business agreement with this organization, not only am I going to get a quality good or service, but someone else has verified that the impact they say they are delivering. And so one of the really cool things about this people and planet first verification is that they actually allow networks to do the verification. So it becomes a revenue model for them. So for example, if Impact Hub Houston wanted to be a verification partner, they actually can do all the verification for all the social enterprises in the Houston market, as an example. Or if at Global you guys wanted to do this, or it doesn't matter, you could come in and be a partner. The idea is the information and the infrastructure should sit where the impact fits, where you guys are. And it should be a part and integrated into your day-to-day operations. So we're investing in things like that. Again, what we know, but also we're investing in markets in the United States, Brazil, India, and select countries in Africa, in addition to the Europe alongside supporting the European Commission in their bisocial movement. So I would say that's where SAP is investing in what we know right now from a CSR perspective. But I'll hand it back, PJ or Tatiana, if you want to add anything from an investment. And I hope I answered your question.
So I'm not sure that I fully understood the question, but I think that based on what, Jen's saying, and also just in general, like some of my experience with working beyond just a startup corporate, like a linear collaboration, but actually looking at more of like an ecosystem approach. One of the areas where we're looking right now at taking more of an ecosystem approach is around regenerative agriculture, because the reality is, for instance, a company like Unilever, we buy, ingredients that go into our products, but we're like so far down kind of the value chain in the sense of like the input that goes into a farm in regards to fertilizers and in regards to water, in regards to like pests, anything that is related, farming equipment, the financing for a farm in order to make a transition to regenerative agriculture, all that stuff, we can't just directly influence it today in order to make it happen. And so looking all the way across, like from the very beginning, to say, okay, like who are all the players across like the value chain that are influencing in order to make regenerative agriculture more of a reality and a scalable reality. So what are the banks doing in order to like offer like loans to the farmers in order so that they can take the risk and make the transition? What are the certifications or verifications that farmers can then feel like they have that credibility in that space? What are like the research organizations that are, involved, and then indeed the farmers, but then also the co-ops that buy from the farmers and then are like a bit the middleman. And so all these different players. So we're right now kind of in this big piece of work around like, yeah, how can we look across that entire value chain? Who are the players? What are the challenges? And how can we come together to come up with some solutions that can create that value gain for everyone along that value chain and create that ultimate benefit for people and planet? So that's a bit of an example of how, of something we're looking at, but I will say that it is complex always, because you still have to come back to the fact that each player has their own motivations, their own pains and gains, so to speak. So how do you find that value alignment so that you can work on something together and you can actually like land it, not just talk about it? And for me, that's like where I'm really curious to see how it evolves. Even if we had like one epic solution that we could all drive together, I feel like that would be success. But yeah, it's easier said than done is what I would say.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a hook from each of yours, and then I know you're both leaving in a couple of minutes, so give you a chance to say some closing words. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer and speak to any makers about some of these ideas. But one thing you said, PJ, is feeds right into actually work we've been doing around ecosystem building. So we've been very good for many years at building our hub communities, like within the hubs, and these like, working in collaborative communities. And in the last years, we've seen a lot of initiatives, these issue-based initiatives, ecosystem building outside of the hubs. And we're doing a few on food systems transition. So we have a pilot happening in Rwanda and Colombia and Costa Rica around how you get players together. So I don't know if that's interesting, to talk about at some point. But one of the things that we've learned is and I guess you're affirming the value of somebody needs to do that convening and that glue, like making the glue happen. And that's something that's often the invisible work, but we do that really well within our hubs. And now we're like, well, how do we do that within these value chains or these ecosystems around certain transition goals? And so that's something, just so you know, it's kind of in our roadmap now that we're evolving, looking at how we can build our practice, how we can learn from each other across contexts, but also at some point, this relates to Jen's point, going, I wish I had the magic button for every single time an external partner or potential partner asks, how many of your hubs are doing this, or how many of your entrepreneurs are doing this? And Jen knows, because I had to admit to her saying, I don't have a magic button. But Hermes, you hit the nail on the head. It's like when people say, who are your top 10 circular female run enterprises? How many indigenous owned enterprises do we have? We don't have all this data at our fingertips. So what, the network you're going to see is we're baking this into our year plan in the next year, saying it's about time we aggregate this, but also like you challenge us, Jen, it's like, well, how do we come across with reliability? How do we know each one of our members are at a certain level? So it's easy to put them in front of, yes, maybe SAP, but also a potential funder, potential government, for social procurement or market access. And so this is a little bit, the edge we need to work with as a network, and I think our next level. So I think that's to be continued. But I want to give you,
Amazing.
because you're both stepping out now, just to give you a chance, and then I'm happy to wind up with whoever wants to stay another 15 minutes or so. But I'd love you to just say, looking to the future, are there trends, developments, maybe a provocation that you might want to leave us with? And I know we'll be in touch anyways.
For me, it's really just that I know it's hard work and I know it's challenging. And there's probably times as entrepreneurs that you feel like you're hitting a wall, but there's also many days I feel like I'm hitting a wall trying to create these collaborations at scale. So it is hard, but all I can say is let's keep fighting the good fight together. And only will we then having these honest conversations. I really appreciate it, Tatiana, that you provoked and you poked and you said, really, what are the challenges? It's really nice to talk about the ideal state, but yeah, there are some, big challenges, but we have to talk about them. There are solutions out there to the challenges, the same way there's solutions out there to all of the big, ambitious, sustainable development goals.
Yeah, thanks.
So earlier this year, and I'm sure this group is aware, but if you're not aware, the UN passed a resolution for something called the social and solidarity economy that essentially finally says that this incredible ecosystem of nonprofits, social enterprises, cooperatives, collectively in the world represent more than 7% of the world's GDP, that they are employing millions of people around the world, that this sector matters. And this sector is going to be a really efficient partner in helping to achieve not only the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but just to achieve innovation in areas that matter, right? In areas that are going to support a future planet that can sustain us. And I think my big wish or my big hope is that incredible market continues to create momentum and gets the recognition it deserves for the incredible work that you are all doing. And if the private sector can come together in support of all of you and scale your impact, we've got a fighting chance. We've got a chance to really make sure that the world is the place that we all know it can be, a place that is just, equitable, and sustainable. And that's what I hope for. So I hope for increased success for all of you and our ability to help you scale.
Thank you very much, and for your time and your commitment and your energy. And I know every once in a while, you're also checking in with many of us, to see how we're doing, what we need, what needs to be done to connect the ecosystem. So I really, I think we all, both appreciate that, but I think it's also, I also think we feel appreciated, right? When we're seen like this, and that people like you are building bridges from what we call, the kind of the black box of corporates, right? Into actually creating value, and deconstructing that. And your honesty about deconstructing some of that, and your energy every day. And I just want to put a little plug. I think, Jen, you've opened up that SAP is looking for, what was it? I think Maria posted it in our Slack group. In one of them, I don't know if you did in the regions or the AREPs, but you're looking for marketplaces, either regional or around the world or in countries, to make sure that all of the companies, right? Do you want to explain it? Because it's nice to hear directly from you.
So this is really active right now. We are publishing a holiday gift guide, and it's really just, we're trying to aggregate all of the incredible opportunities for people to spend with incredible organizations this holiday season, or any season, frankly, around the world. It's a really tough time out there, and if we can help shift the hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent in celebration of holidays, from Diwali to Hanukkah to Christmas to Kwanzaa, you name it, we'd love to help them spend with you and your organizations around the world. We just took, or unfortunately, we'll improve our system next year. Apparently, when you send out a shared, yes, okay, so send it to Tatiana. If you have anything, we'll make sure it gets integrated. All we need is your homepage link and a 1-sentence describing what your organization offers. Or if you have a gift guide or some sort of a marketplace for your respective hub, that's great. We'll just link to your hub. That's awesome. We would welcome the opportunity to spend a lot of money with you.
That's market access. Thank you very much for coming. Have a great holiday, Jen. Good luck at the event. PJ, enjoy Copenhagen. It's another cool city. And we hope to continue the conversation with you. And if there's anything, any questions or opportunities or things you see, or, things that you think the Impact Hub Network should learn about, or, or reflect on.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for bringing that back.
Well, connect with us on LinkedIn. Let's keep the conversation going.
Please
Great to be here. Thanks for having us. We'll speak soon. Thanks, Tatiana.
And
bye.
If you're working in Brazil, if you're working in India, if you're working in the United States, we would love to hear from you in particular, because those are going to be 3 investment markets for us next year. So reach out to Tatiana. We'll network and connect through her, and or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
We can actually, Maria, maybe make a note. We can make a list of the impact hubs in those countries and pass it on.
Woo! Yeah. Awesome.
Great. Well,
cool.
Thank you, everyone. So lovely to be here with you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. We can have a little wash up if anybody wants. Yeah. Any other challenges, insights working with corporates, or any insights there that was helpful?
I mean, not about work with corporates, but this morning we were talking about the growth